बीकानेर थिएटर आर्ट एंड कल्चर फेस्टिवल में आप सभी दर्शकों का बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। और आज हम एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय पे बात करने वाले हैं, जिसका सीधा सीधा संबंध आर्ट कल्चर और न सिर्फ आर्ट कल्चर एंड थिएटर बट हमारे फेस्टिवल्स, हमारा जो सेलिब्रेशन है हमारे लोक में, हमारी जिंदगी में, हमारे संसार में, उन सभी के इर्द गिर्द हम लोग आज ये बात करने वाले हैं। और हमारे साथ आई एम वेरी हैप्पी दैट वी हैव टू फेमस पर्सनैलिटीज, फेमस sort of people who are deeply involved, engaged in promoting art and culture. So I am happy to welcome Sanjukta Ghosh and Dr. Amandeep Singh Kapoor to be with us. And thank you very much, both of you, that you accept our invitation and took your time to be with us. So on the behalf of Lokayan and the whole festival team, I welcome you all here.
Thank you, Gopal.
So, thank you. So, संजुक्ता जी बहुत लंबे समय से आर्ट कल्चर और उसके प्रमोशन में बहुत डीपली एंगेज्ड हैं, और फिलहाल वे आर्टिस्टिक डायरेक्टर है सुहास साउथ एशिया इंस्टीट्यूट, यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ लंदन में। और वहां से आप बहुत अलग अलग तरह की सांस्कृतिक और कला से जुड़ी हुई गतिविधियों को संचालित कर रहे हैं, और अनेक जगहों पे बेसिकली पूरे साउथ एशिया के आर्टिस्ट के साथ ये काम करते हैं बहुत डीपली, और उनको अलग अलग प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे फीचर भी आप कर रहे हैं। आप बहुत सारे फेस्टिवल्स भी ऑर्गेनाइज करते हैं, और अभी पेंडेमिक के दौरान, कोरोना के दौरान, उन्होंने आर्टिस्ट के लिए फंड रेजिंग का भी एक बड़ा प्रोग्राम अपनी तरफ से ऑर्गेनाइज किया, अपने यूनिवर्सिटी की तरफ से। एंड मैं आपका इंट्रोडक्शन करना चाहूंगा डॉक्टर अमनदीप सिंह कपूर से, जो पेशे से आईपीएस हैं, और आईपीएस बनने से पहले आप डॉक्टर भी रह चुके हैं। और ये बहुत ही रेयर कॉम्बिनेशन हमको देखने को मिलता है कि डॉक्टर भी हैं और आईपीएस भी हैं। और आप अभी हम आपको बधाई भी देना चाहेंगे, दर्शक भी बधाई दे सकते हैं कि अभी अभी हाल ही में ये डीआईजी की पोस्ट पे प्रमोट हुए हैं। सो मैनी मैनी कांग्रेचुलेशन सर फॉर योर प्रमोशन। एंड और डॉक्टर कपूर पिछले काफी समय से बेसिकली मैं इनको आईपीएस भी के रूप में लोग देखते हैं, डॉक्टर के रूप में भी देखते हैं, लेकिन आप बहुत डीपली कल्चर को प्रमोशन में भी बहुत डीपली इन्वॉल्व हैं। और अभी पिछले 5-6 साल से एक बहुत के कारण डॉक्टर कपूर बहुत फेमस हैं, और उनका ये इनिशिएटिव राजस्थान में एक नई ऊर्जा, एक नए तरह का संवाद कला के क्षेत्र में पैदा हुआ इनकी वजह से। तो हम डॉक्टर कपूर से बात करेंगे इस इनिशिएटिव के बारे में कि राजस्थान कबीर यात्रा का पूरा एक्सपीरियंस इनका कैसा रहा। फिलहाल आज जो हम बात करने जा रहे हैं उसका मूल सब्जेक्ट है कि हम कला और कला से जुड़े हुए सारे जो संदर्भ है उनका स्टेट और इंस्टीट्यूशंस के साथ क्या एक कनेक्शन है। तो मैं इस बात को संजुक्ता जी के पास लेके जाना चाहूंगा कि आप थोड़ा हमें बताएं कि क्योंकि आप एक पूरे इंस्टीट्यूशंस के बिहाफ पे बहुत सारे प्रोग्राम करते हैं, तो व्हाट इज द रिलेशन बिटवीन आर्ट एंड स्टेट ऑब्लिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस? सो आई जस्ट वांट यू टू पुट सम लाइट ऑन दैट।
Thank you, Gopal. Firstly, I want to thank the whole of the Lokayan team, the festival team, for inviting me on this panel, and I'm very grateful for that. It's a great honor, and I'm extremely pleased to be here to talk about the relationship of art and government, which is something, is it okay for me to break into English fully, or because probably it's
sure.
national audience that we are going to engage with as well, I'm hoping. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the relationship between art and government goes back a long way. It's really a historical relationship. And being a historian, my first instinct is to take you back in the past rather than just talk about the present and how things have developed. So when I was looking at the Bikaner Art Festival, the first thing that came to my mind is how princely states in the past, in the colonial times, were engaged with developing this relationship, which is not to do with just the British, but the Indian Rajas, the royal family, and how institutions panned out from these princely states. So there is that connection already quite established between these kind of royal institutions and royal patronage to art and culture, especially in the princely states. But going back to the colonial times, I think there's a long history of British patronage and how things moved on. And what at the moment of independence was that, you are talking about the connection directly between art and nation building. So nation building was right at the start, the most important thing. So that is when, we started talking about unity in diversity. And that kind of underlined the whole connection between state, society, and art for several decades, until we are seeing the new shifts. Of course, every government is going to be different and the focus is going to be different as well. But so there are lots of, civil society initiatives as well during this early period. I mean, you probably know about some names like the Gandharva Mahavidyalaya and others that were involved with at this point when lots of civil society members are directly engaged with it. But if you look at the shifts, then comes the partition moment, and currently how we are looking at partition, where the interest is really about collections and curation from the point of people's perspectives. So, people's objects, people's memory is becoming very important. And I think if you look at the collections of the Partition Museum currently, that is where the focus is, that, what are the oral histories behind? What are the artifacts behind? So, the people's participation in directly with art curation is becoming quite important. And this is very different from a long institutional history, because the institutional history has been more or less the government institutions, particularly like, all the academies were at the start came about, and they were at the forefront of this unity in diversity model, where ambassadors from India, cultural ambassadors from India would go to the West and perform. And so there's a lot of give and take there. A lot of cultural exchange models were created around that. So there was a direct patronage of artists around this time. And artists were representing your country. They were representing your cultural heritage and going to the UK, to Europe, to America. And those were the times when, people like Ravi Shankar and others. I think, one should also mention Uday Shankar. I recently did a film on Uday Shankar and how he was really carrying the India's flag and promoting the early forms of folk dance on the World Forum. So, those were the times when the Indo-European cultural heritage was becoming quite important. And the state played a big role in organizing various conferences, various exhibitions and performance forums. So the patronage is really about promotion of Indian culture and heritage, both within India as well as outside India. So that was definitely going on with lots of these academy-based institutions. But when you talk about the more general aspects of the relationship between art and society, I think it's important that art is also used to talk in terms of more ideology. And art has an ideological function as well in society. And that is something that was, you question the dominant ideology of the government. And so, the relationship between art, society, and government has always been on the one hand, there's a direct connection, but there's also a lot of indirect connections as well, where people start to question certain things. So the relationship now, you can see how there's a rise of autocracy and authoritarian regimes trying to control the ideology through art. But what I'm trying to also look at now, especially in the context of pandemic, I want to mention that the role of art, a lot of people see it as a form of dissent, a form of protest, and a kind of an ideological motive for art to be sandwiched between government and society. But art has also got a larger role, and this role is becoming even more important in reconciliation, in peace building, in therapies. And art has that sort of power, which is a bit more autonomous, I feel. And it is also, and this autonomous potential of art is something that is now coming up, especially in the context of pandemic, quite a lot, where it's not really about corruption of influences, but it's also about how people can express themselves. Individual artists can express themselves, individual communities can express themselves. So it's really an interesting moment in history where we are looking more of the community participation rising even more and mushrooming in a big way between the government and its direct patronage. So we can dwell on this later. I think let Amanjeet come up with a few points and then we can see. But these would be my initial ideas that, there's one hand, you have the elite model of royal patronage, state institutions, but at the same time, you can see how the function of art is changing during the pandemic as well. Yeah, so I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a good sort of a point of reference where we can lead this discussion for sure.
Yeah.
And I would request Amanji to, because he is not directly, but the part of the an institute, and where art and the intervention of art becomes more important, because at a one time with whom he is working is completely coming from a different sort of a background. And how you, sir, think that what is the core idea of bringing art into a institutional space, like you're working directly in the police. So you're mute. You need to unmute your.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Gopal. It was lovely to hear Sanjukta ji with the opening remarks. I will, since we had a basic premise that the three things are central to this panel discussion. One is, how do we see these different terms today, like art and culture and heritage and civilizational values, and there's a lot of confusion around also. And second part is how government relates to them, the contemporary government, how they should be important to government. And third is how the personal examples we would like to share. So I'll first start my opening remarks with the first two topics, which I enumerated. I'll deliberately keep it in Hindi so that, because it will be better for a mix of English and Hindi. So I'll try to keep it in Hindi. हमारे तीन चार ही टर्म्स हैं, जैसे कल्चर हुआ या हेरिटेज हुआ या सिविलाइजेशनल या सिविलाइजेशन हुई. अगर इसको हम समझना चाहें तो अपने श्रोताओं के लिए हल्की सी एक बैकग्राउंड देना चाहूंगा. अगर हम हिस्ट्री के किसी भी स्लाइस को वहीं काटे, एक टेम्पोरल स्लाइस काटी जाए, उस समय में अगर हम क्योस को और विघटन को दूर कर दें तो उस जगह पे जो चीज बचती है वो सिविलाइजेशन है. तो एनीथिंग माइनस chaos is the civilizational value of that time in the history of that place. So it implies a static इन्फ्लुएंस, मतलब वहां पे स्थायित्व है, वो स्थायित्व जो है वो कई चीजों को जन्म देगा। वो वहां की कल्चर को जन्म देगा, वो वहां की आर्कियोलॉजिकल स्टैम्प को जन्म देगा, वो वहां की स्टेबल एथनिसिटीज को जन्म देगा। जैसे आर्यंस आए तो एक एथनिसिटी थी, द्रविडियन पहले से एग्जिस्ट कर रहे थे, वो दूसरी एथनिसिटी थी, उनकी अपना खाना था, उनकी अपनी भाषा थी, उनका अपना ड्रेस था, उनका अपना डांस थे, उनके अपने परफॉर्मेंसेस थे। तो स्टेबल एथनिसिटीज क्योंकि स्थायित्व है तो ये सब चीजें डेवलप होती। कल्चर वो हिस्सा है, हम इसको जनरली हेरिटेज से भी कंफ्यूज करते हैं। तो हेरिटेज इनहेरिटेड है। अगर मैंने जैसे कहा कि सिविलाइजेशनल स्टैम्प एक टेम्पोरल स्लाइस है हिस्ट्री की, अगर हम हिस्ट्री को कॉन्टिन्यूम में देखें, अगर ये हम इसको शुरू से अंत तक देखें, तो जो इनहेरिट होके हमारे पास आ रहा है वो हेरिटेज है। तो उसमें नेचुरली नेचुरल हेरिटेज भी है जो कि आदमी ने नहीं बनाया है, जो पेड़ पौधे, फ्लोरा फौना, ये भी इंक्लूडेड है। प्लस अगर हम इसमें जो मनुष्य का इसमें जो छाप इसमें आ जाता है, तो वो जो है वो कल्चरल हेरिटेज है, इसको हम कल्चर भी कहते हैं। तो उसमें इंटेंजिबल पार्ट भी रहता है और इनटेंजिबल पार्ट भी रहता है। तो इंटेंजिबल में आपके ट्रेडिशंस हो गए, जो लिविंग ट्रेडिशंस भी बोलते हैं, जो मैंने अभी न्यूमरेट कराए कि अगर आप माँ अपनी बेटी को आगे खाना बनाने के तरीके दिखाती है तो ये लिविंग ट्रेडिशंस है। बाप अपने विस्तृत ज्ञान आगे बांटता है ओरल ट्रेडिशन से, चाहे हो चाहे कैनोनिकल हो, कुछ लिख के दे, तो ये लिविंग ट्रेडिशंस आगे कैरी ऑन होते हैं। तो मोटा मोटा अगर हमने समझा कि अगर एक जगह पे स्थायित्व है तो सिविलाइजेशन का जन्म निश्चित है, सिविलाइजेशनल वैल्यूज वहां पनपेंगी, वो आगे बढ़ेंगी तो वो हेरिटेज का रूप ले लेंगी। हेरिटेज नेचुरल तो है ही, उसमें हमारा उसको सिर्फ संजोने का योगदान है। हाँ, लिविंग हेरिटेज को आगे बढ़ाना, कल्चरल हेरिटेज को आगे बढ़ाना, ये हमारा सब उस सभ्यता के लोगों का, उससे आने वाली पुश्तों का, सभी का एक सामूहिक योगदान इसमें रहता है। तो ये तो हो गई पहली बात। अब इसमें अगर हम देखें कि आगे बढ़ने के कई तरीके हैं। ओरल ट्रेडिशन जैसे मैंने कहा एक तरीका है। हम परफॉर्मेंस ट्रेडिशंस ले लें, हमारे भारतवर्ष में परफॉर्मेंस ट्रेडिशंस शुरू से बड़ी प्रबल रही हैं, चाहे वो एपिक परफॉर्मेंसेस हो, चाहे वो टेम्पल परफॉर्मेंसेस हो, चाहे वो पपेट्स हो, मास्क डांस हो, मार्शल आर्ट्स हो, और इवन रोमिंग बार्ड ट्रेडिशंस जिसे बोलते हैं, जिसमें आपके हम जिस पे राजस्थान कबीर यात्रा आपका लोकायन जिसमें कराता है, जिसमें वानी ट्रेडिशनल सिंगिंग है, या लावनी थी, या भवाई है, या जात्रा है। तो ये इस टाइप के ट्रेडिशंस जो हैं, ये हमारी लिविंग हेरिटेज को आगे बढ़ाने का काम करते हैं। और तीसरा है कैनोनिकल की, अगर जैसा कि संयुक्ता मैम अभी कह रही थी कि उसमें जजमान का रोल जरूर आता है, कि वो बैठ के कुछ लिखवाता है, उसको कैनोनिकल रूप से या पेडागॉजी के रूप में उसको एक समाहित करता है, संग्रहित करता है, और चाहे वो फिर एक लिखित फॉर्म में आ जाए, ग्रंथ के फॉर्म में आ जाए, या किसी और तरीके से उसको म्यूजियम में आ जाए, पांडुलिपि बन जाए, को हस्तलेख बन जाए, कोई चीज उसमें, मतलब भिन्न भिन्न फॉर्म से एक जजमान की आवश्यकता रहती है। तो ऐसा नहीं है कि अगर जजमान नहीं होगा, या अभी आज के पहले जजमान थे, आज वो रूप गवर्नमेंट को अदा करना है, और अगर जजमान और गवर्नमेंट नहीं होंगे तो ये चीज आगे नहीं बढ़ेगी, ये बढ़ेगी आगे। पर गवर्नमेंट का या जजमानी जो प्रथा थी, जो कि पैट्रोनेज जिसे कहते हैं, सिंपल इंग्लिश में पैट्रोनेज जो था, वो चाहे पहले राजा देते थे, आज की टाइम में गवर्नमेंट दे रही है या देना है उसको, उसके जो निहित कारण है या जिसके वजह से उसको देना जरूरी है, वो इसलिए है कि सर्वप्रथम एक नेशनल कैरेक्टर जैसे बात हुई, या नेशनल इंटरेस्ट है, उसके लिए ये इंपॉर्टेंट रहता है। दूसरा एक सॉफ्ट पावर का भी काम करता है। हम अपने इन्हीं वैल्यूज को, ट्रेडिशंस को, इन्हीं कल्चरल आइडियाज को या सिविलाइजेशनल वैल्यूज को कोई देश या कोई स्टेट सॉफ्ट पावर की तरह भी यूज करता है। और इसके साथ साथ मुझे लगता है कि एक हिस्टोरिकल सेंस जिस सोसाइटीज में रहा है, जिसे सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री कहा जाता है, जब ब्रिटिशर्स ने हमारे ऊपर राज किया तो ये चीज उन्होंने सिखाई कि एक सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री कैसे एक अच्छी आदत है। तो जब हिस्टोरिकल सेंस किसी सोसाइटी में रहता है तो वो केओस में वापस ना लौट जाए, इसलिए भी जरूरी होता है। और सबसे जो चौथी इंपॉर्टेंट बात है, गवर्नमेंट का रोल इसलिए भी इसमें आ जाएगा क्यों, इंडिविजुअल एफर्ट्स हमेशा, उनका क्षेत्र विस्तार, उनका एफर्ट, उनकी एनर्जी सीमित रह जाती है। गवर्नमेंट उसको many time extrapolate कर सकती है, उसको exponentially widening कर सकती है उस efforts का. The efforts can be taken up to an altogether different trajectory and level. So the government's role in preserving the art and culture and the civilizational values is immense, and there's no denying about it. And here I see the role of then, be it any specialized agencies or policy-making bodies. For example, for preserving natural heritage, you will have to have wildlife laws being implemented. You'll have to have environment impact assessments going on all the way around. Similarly, to preserve the intangible or that portion of culture which forms a living tradition, you will have to again have policy initiatives, statutes, laws coming up. They're not possible without a proper sharing, what you say, cohabitation of ideas, a symbiosis, and a very effective way of dealing it maturely. For example, the Antiquities and National Treasures Act was brought in 1972, and altogether it gave a fillip to conservation of all these artifacts, museum creations. All treasures were no more a part of a personal treasure, rather they became a national treasure with just one stroke of law. So these sort of policy initiatives the government has to provide. Now the question is the will and the wherewithal. The will, maybe the government may be having the will, but generally we see as we move along or as we see the trajectory or the evolution of the cultural landscape, that the wherewithal or the resources with government are generally meager or they are very scarce. So here the civil society and all other organizations and आपकी जैसी संस्थाओं का इसमें इमेंस रोल बन जाता है कि हाँ, एक गवर्नमेंट को गाइड भी करते रहें और गवर्नमेंट के साथ मिलके जहां उनकी वेरविदाल जहां पे नहीं है वहां पे आप अपना रोल अदा करें.
Yeah, it was yeah, any comments, Sanjukta ji, you can get.
Yeah, I mean, Amanjit really elaborated the introductory parts that we started off with. One is the whole issue of state patronage, elite patronage, and the different kinds of terminology that is in circulation. And I think a very interesting point is that now there's this whole question of whose heritage is coming up. Like you have preservation acts, conservation acts, which demarcates what is your national heritage. At the same time, if you look at the state of our cities, where heritage is all over and all around you, but people's understanding of that heritage is also, it's mine and I can just sleep under that heritage. And if someone tries to conserve that, then there is a lot of there's not a lot of automatic uptake of that will to conserve as well, because what is a heritage building in the city can also become very disputed. So even if you want to restore an old building in a city, you will find that there are other kinds of problems, like who is inhabiting in that conservation area, or whose land is this conservation area. So there are whose heritage it is becoming another point of conflict between the will to conserve by the state, private entrepreneurs who want to say restore a heritage building. But it's not an easy thing, because how people relate to that heritage is also developed for a long period of time. So in India, whose heritage is becoming a big question. And it's interesting to see how we therefore define what is heritage and how we educate people about that heritage as well, and the need for the conservation of it. So that's one side. There's a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of educational dissemination that needs to happen, which is not just about your own art and culture and its representational value, but it's also about conservation. I think that emphasis has to be very much there. And what are the things we can do, whether it's civil society initiatives or whether it's state-oriented initiatives? Conservation is actually a principle. And now I think there are lots of workshops going on with private individuals, with foreign universities getting involved in the restoration of city heritage. So there's a lot of nexus that is already starting to build. I know a few examples I can throw around Calcutta or Bombay, or industrial heritage restorations outside main cities. So that kind of consciousness is developing. So that is also integrating the role of the civil society with state initiatives, government initiatives, global organizational initiatives that are coming on as well. These are some of the things that you'll have to bear in mind when you talk of heritage. You know, whose heritage is a big question now as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That I mean, in the context of work, when we are working with the artists and especially with folk musicians, it is very, there is always challenge that when you really work with a specific artist or any art form, it is like they really care about it. It's true, but at the same time, it is not passing through generations to generations, and there are many reasons. And here the system of patronage, because earlier it was by Jajmani jo family patronage we kafi, it was the beginning of the developing the art any sort of a village or any habitat. But because right now the thing is that most of the artists have lost their patronage, family patronage. Now they're only dependent on number one festivals or any government ad. That's the only options they have. And the result is that we are facing, and we are in a position to say that there are a lot of art forms which are actually vanishing, which are not in a living form right now. So my question is that, because we think that the state should be a patronage, but the state is clearly saying that we can't run the show, but we can facilitate. And in that part, they are okay. I mean, I don't think they have anything wrong about it when the state is clearly saying that we can't run the show, we can't feed 1,000 artists, we can't save the specific art forms or crowd forms. So how do you deal with this question when there is a sort of, do you believe that there is an immunity within the artist community, that there is nothing to lose, something will come up?
Do you want me to answer this, or
Yeah.
do you want
Yeah,
to?
you.
I have worked recently with lots of artists during this pandemic, and time and again, we brought out this question of the resilience of the artist community. And if you think about it, the artist community came forward to do lots of digital performances without asking for money. And often some artists would say that we will not perform without money because our art needs to be valued. And I kind of respect both sides. On the one hand, you want to come out into the digital forum, change many of the things that you're used to. It is not very easy for a singer to sit in front of Zoom and start singing, because you don't have the usual gadgets that you're used to. Your tune goes haywire, you're not pitching in the right way as you would in front of a physical audience. So the adaptation of the artist in the digital forum is a huge example, especially during the pandemic, to see how artists have adapted their skill and their ability to connect with the audience. So in that sense, the whole question of resilience came up. Is the artist community resilient? Artists have always been resilient, because if you look at disasters, if you look at famine, for instance, it brought out a whole generation of artists around famine. I myself, my work has been about artists' response to famine. And, I have seen the whole 50s and 60s, you can see, the whole social movement of the I wouldn't use the word communism, because many of the artists during that period were not necessarily aligned to political parties, but they absorbed the ideals of that time, that it's important to restore society when there was hunger and when there was famine. And so famine generation artists were responding to the crisis. So artists have always responded to the crisis, and I'm sure they're responding now as well, because they are finding ways to be resilient. But this is not something that artists alone can do. That there has to be some kind of a response from the wider society as to how we deal with artists. So I had the opportunity to take some interviews of higher government officials, and I did bring out this question, that how are you going to manage some kind of funding for these artists? So the answer was that many of our artists who are in the digital sector, very established, particularly in the film industry, for instance, those who are spending a lot of money to do 5 minutes of video ad or whatever, they can contribute even a percentage of their salary to a large artist fund. Then, you create some kind of insurance for these kind of crises for the artists community to respond to. So it's really about contribution from the larger cultural industry to have some kind of an insurance fund for artists to respond to at this time of crisis. And I'm not saying this is necessarily a large philanthropic project, but it is something that we should be very conscious of, that you do need a stream of standard livelihood, standard income source for the artist to guarantee that minimum protection. And in that order, I think it's important to treat the artistic community as part of an industry. And this is where I was going to come to, and I wanted to bring up in this discussion, that I think in India, one of the things that is missing, I feel, is an understanding that art and culture itself has got that entrepreneurial capacity in its own right, not just from patronage, but artists themselves can generate. And how they can generate is by tying their own art forms to the larger industries that are around it. So whether it's heritage industry or education industry, or I think education is an industry. It is an industry in the West, for instance. So I think it should be an industry in India as well, with the large education sector. And similarly, tourism, for instance, which is again a large industry for South Asia and Asian communities. So to link up the artistic production, artist community with the larger industrial cause gives you that kind of fillip, which is not just about cottage industries, which was the first phase of movement. And I think that was the trend, that everything is cottage industry, everything was khadi oriented, which gave a lot of centralization. But that centralization force is missing, I think, in Indian context. And it's important to create that kind of mapping with regard to cultural festivals, whether it's as you're saying, the festival economy is getting very big in India. When I was in my university days, we didn't have so many dance festivals, so many cultural art and craft festivals. Everyone is having a festival now about different kinds of small scale, large scale, numerous days, online festivals. So, the word festival is a big buzz. But, and as you say, that there is a lot of dependence on this festivals as well for the artists. It's important to see what is the revenue generation here, what is the scale here, what are the inputs and outputs. I think a lot of cultural mapping needs to be done around this festival economy.
Yes,
and to see how it can be diversified. Because if you look at the art and craft of one artist, he is not just able to, I'll give you an example. I know a dancer who does Odissi dance, but during the festival, in order to diversify her income, she used her skill of stitching and embroidery to support her family. So, this is how I think you can diversify the artist's income, by connecting him with different kinds of industries. But there isn't that kind of centralization here. There needs to be some kind of centralization of an idea that it's not, I don't want to distance myself and we can't feed hundreds of artists is what the government is saying. But the government also needs to get this message that the art and culture community is not just something that is isolated. It has to be connected with the larger functions and with the larger industries. I think that perspective has to grow. And perhaps these kind of festivals you're doing and these kind of panel discussions you're doing will help to raise these issues. So I'll stop here and maybe Amanjit has more to say.
Yeah. So I want sir to reflect on, because he has been in the many districts of Rajasthan as a SP, and he engaged with different sort of a artist community wherever he posted, because he was fortunate to have so many visit so many places in Rajasthan, and Rajasthan is known for its music and art and culture. So what is, sir, your experience when you were posted as a SP in a different districts, and how you engaged artists with into your work?
My experience with artists generally stems from my association with Lokayan, first of all. It is not as though the personal interest in arts and culture was a different thing as I engaged with them on a personal level. But on an institutional level, when Rajasthan Police and specifically the district police, which I was heading, they wanted to engage in community policing efforts there, then the method or the way of doing it was through civil society. And yes, Rajasthan Kabir Yatra was a very successful experiment. We also tried to take it, this was for just sharing for those who are new to this, that this was a community policing initiative. We wanted to take the energies from the artists, from the well-meaning people to those areas which were inflicted by arson and violence, and we wanted to counter it was a measure to counter violent extremism that was developing in the areas where I was posted. And it, as a thinking policeman, you can say I wanted something to be done to counter that. It was Rajasthan, and especially the Western Rajasthan, where I got the opportunity to feel the pulse of the area, is not a place where this arson, violence, and violent extremism and communalism, this should be developing or grooming. But yes, we have to put a counter narrative to that, to put our foot where it should be. So that was one measure we took. Definitely, music was the most palpable, or you can say most effective way to reach to people. So we used that. My experience with the artists on an institutional front was through Lokayan. Personal levels, I have attended many literature festivals, music festivals, wherever I have been, and through them, organically, I've known many artists. I've known many festival organizers and many people. I have developed the acquaintances. But yes, what Sanjukta ma'am was also saying was that what I felt was that there was no consolidation of efforts, neither through the efforts of artists nor the consolidation of the efforts of government. There was no, what you can say, clarity of mind or clarity of purpose vis-a-vis the government thinking was where I could feel like it was only festival centric. It was cyclical, like few time of the calendar of the year, you can say.
Yeah.
And it was not, the effort was not consolidated. It was very piecemeal, you can say. So that was my feeling. And you can see islands of excellence, whether it's a government effort, where there's an effort of the artists. You could see artists representing in Coke Studio from those very villages and those very areas. And then the artists, they were just, they were asking for alms, and they were always in penury. That was the plethora or the extremes I could see, that there were islands of excellence everywhere. be it civil society, be it conservationist, be it artist, be it government machinery. So what we need as of now is the consolidation of efforts, be it in all these sectors which I mentioned, and I think that will take it to a new trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with this, because like you mentioned about Coke Studio, and I was just reminded of an artist who I recently contacted. I don't want to take names here on this forum, but folk singers, who are performing in Coke Studio, but at the same time, they have dire poverty to deal with. So you kind of think that, you have access to these studios, you are capable of, adapting your folk music to new technologies, which is also helping you reach a wider audience. And I think the whole pandemic teaches you to some extent that, now artists are becoming more technology conscious, and the younger generation of artists obviously helping their fathers. I mean, I did a perfectly good festival recently with an older generation folk artist, where the son is helping with the technology to reach out. And therefore, he is able to collect his fees and manage it digitally. So I think the digital footprint is going to be quite big in the next few years, where there'll be a lot of intergenerational learning around technology and how to then upscale your heritage-based or oral history-based music and art into this digital realm, and that shift is going to be quite big, I feel, where there's a lot of oral collection that Gopal, you're probably involved in, and you constantly talk about endangered forms of folk art, but how that comes into the digital realm and how artists are also willing to share it in the digital realm will change the dynamics of the audience as well. Because now you can see that there is a growing global audience around folk music and folk arts as well. And this digital platform enables you to broaden that audience constantly. So I feel that the dissemination is going to be quite large through the digital forum as well. I've already spoken about diversification and links with other industries like education, tourism, hospitality as examples. And I think Amanjeet has also endorsed that. But the point about peace and reconciliation is also very important, because increasingly artists are being used for these kind of things. The whole mental health issue, for instance, during the pandemic, as well as the reconstruction and recovery of the pandemic, is going to be quite an important area. And I think the connection between the health sector and artists is completely disconnect still, especially in India, where mental health is still something that is not in the therapy realm as much as it should be. It is developing, I'm not going to deny that, because people are more conscious now of mental health and they're openly talking about mental health. So, the mental health and art and therapy is again a big sector that probably artists can think of connecting their skills, and we should be able to create another kind of generation of income around that. So Gopal, I think you wanted to raise the point about self-support for artists.
Yes,
That is why the whole issue of self-support.
Because I think this pandemic, when even as institutions, we got a lot of calls from the artists that we need help, we need support, and it's true that this sort of a crisis is not the only crisis. It has happened in past when there is a drought, when there is a lot of natural sort of a crisis also. But what it's my opinion, it's not a question, I'm not asking that, but since they lost their family patronage, they had to ask other people for the support. Imagine if there was a crisis, let's say 50 years back or 40 years back, I don't think, or Facebook exists, I don't think people come on the Facebook and would ask help, because the family actually, there is a whole social security around the artist community, that they are anyway, if they sing the whole year or not, they perform or not, their family is secure for whole year. But since they lost their patronage, lost their sort of a family support, the Jajmani Pratha, now they left with no one. So I think the question, even artists, because yesterday I was talking with Anwar Khanji, Padma Shri Anwar Khanji, I had a session with him, and he was saying that, he mentioned a very important point, that we are here because our Jajman is here. He was constantly referring Jajmani Pratha, Jajman. And I can understand, I can feel that why he is so much, putting, that why they need Jajman. Because in that crisis, whether it's a corona, whether it's because they need a alternative economic sort of a substitute other than the festivals, other than the tourism, because most of, even 70% of the musicians in Rajasthan are dependent on the tourist. Now they are the whole pandemic, they couldn't come and they had to, they were in crisis. So what could be the other self-supporting initiative or sort of a programs we can do for them?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, we were discussing this even before you raised this question, that there isn't that centralized coordination as to how we can create sustainable livelihood for the artists. And the lack of this coordination comes from a certain perception as to what is the function of art in society. And that has been connected to then very event-oriented stuff. That you have your programs, you have your festivals, you perform, your audience comes and they pay. So it's always been event-oriented, it's always been festival, as if the artist is there only for entertainment. What I'm trying to tell you is you need to shift from that model where the artist is not just about entertainment, but it's also about sustainability of livelihood. And the only way you can do that is by connecting your art to the larger context of the economy and by connecting it to other industries. So if tourism has shut down, health is becoming big. If health shuts down, which it never will be, then education has to step in. So, it's this lateral connection, and you sitting in Lokayan, you can, I'm not saying this is your job, but I'm saying that organizations like yourself who has made these lateral links, something that the artist himself sitting in the house cannot do, but they can turn to you and you can be that advisory board where you are able to connect to hospitality sector. I mean, you have great speakers for this event. There are hoteliers, there are entrepreneurs who are talking about this cultural capital, which is there in India. So, they have the better ideas. The hotels are also suffering during the pandemic, but this is not the long-term picture. This is a short-term picture still. I'm hoping that, because we are bringing things under control. So when things open up, then how do you connect these artists to these various industries, to these various heads? And unless they find a source of income through these various channels, that same client patron model of looking after, the feudal model, has to dissolve, because that's not how it will continue, I think. Yeah. Because even patronage is shifting quite a lot. It's not patronage anymore. There are lots of individuals, there are lots of art and craft orders that are coming in through young artists, through new models of entrepreneurs, through new businesses, that is the creative industry. So unless the artist is able to pitch within that creative industry, they will always be isolated. They'll always have that thinking that, my family is there to support, but the state-society relationship is important. Yeah. I think that those kind of shifts have to happen, and organizations like yourself, who are able to connect to 300 artists, who are able to bring so many industry heads together, is where the discussion should be. That, what is the kind of sustainable model you can build from here?
Yeah,
So
that's true. Thank you very much. I think we are in the last minute of this panel.
thank you.
And,
Yeah.
I would request Amanji to say a few last word about what is his take about, because it was a in general perception in India that it is a very rare combination that how can a police sort of initiate a music festival. It's not a festival, though it's a yatra, and it helped change the notion that police is for this, police is not for that. So you broke that the whole narrative. So how do you think that police should, as an officer or as a part of the police system, what do you think that how art should be the integral part of any institutional model?
Uh,
One
yes,
last point as well. So
there's a very cliched or very archetypal view of police or image of police. But I have always said, like during yatras also, with the interacting with the yatris and giving my keynote speeches, I've always said that how I see the role of the police in the whole of the societal way of evolution is that police is a force standing between chaos and civilization. That is my way of interpreting and the best role the police can encompass. It's a force standing between chaos and civilization. And we should, it's not that only something has happened in Rajasthan. Every police force has these inherent sensibilities, subtle sensibilities. For example, I've also shared this. The Punjab police takes its logo from a doha of Kabir. Santa mano duta dano ek utwari meri. Like I'm with the saints and I'll slay the demons. And this is my role as a police officer. This Kabir says to in Guru Granth Sahib, page 699. So this is the slogan of the Punjab police is Kabir's Doha. So it's not that subtle sensibilities doesn't exist. They exist all over India. All police forces have them. It's only how forcefully they come out and how collaborative they are. I always say that to countering violent extremism, to sustain the energies of the youth, and to build a very sustainable community policing models, these sensibilities are always handy. For example, I also believe, I'll take the thread from what Sanjukta ji was saying, how to consolidate the efforts for sustainable livelihood. Today, India is having an immense demographic dividend. It's a high time that we should dovetail cultural dividend into it, whether through the new education policy that has just come in or through the independent efforts of the civil society and NGOs. We should dovetail this. And once we have this cultural dividend flowing from the demographic dividend, our artists will be safe and sound and much more better than what they are today. Because we have Facebook with us, we have YouTube with us, we have many more social media platforms with which we weren't existing before. But we still don't have a knowledge base or we can educative drives to sustain the youth towards these interests. So one is that we have to generate cultural dividend from amongst the demographic dividend. And secondly, we can have the CSR, this ecosystem is again developing. We can have some philanthropy from there and then put some entrepreneur energies of the artists to sort of a self-help groups which are evident in women folk in the villages. We can have some similar self-help groups of artists which will then make the whole effort of sustainable livelihood very organic, and it will be self-righteous also. So these are my comments that we have to be a facilitator, whether it's police or government machinery in total, but in what way, whichever way we can do that, it will be a sheer pleasure for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
just want to quickly add this, before I finish. I just also wanted to, because there was that thread that how as an institutional base, we are also promoting art and culture from the West. If you notice that, the thrust has been really the global civil society. The global civil society is very large. It doesn't have that overarching connection. There is no sort of institutional binding. It's quite flexible, with so many mushrooming of private cultural bodies now. Even in the UK, every now and then I see that there's a lot of personal entrepreneurship that's coming in. There are smaller groups, smaller societies. So the global civil society is really mushrooming. And art promotion is also going through these various organizations, which is not just about commercial, but it's also, you need to think of practitioners who are not artists themselves. I am not a Kuchipudi dancer or a Bharatanatyam dancer, but my interest is not just commercial. And at the same for Amanjit, the interest is not commercial, but we are using our knowledge and skills to connect this whole with the whole body of artists and create experiences. For me, it's not just about representing India's heritage to the West anymore, but also to connect with what is your core value of culture and heritage, and how that can become useful for even Western societies or other societies. That is the global civil society that is forming, where we can really talk of interconnections and interchange, not only to showcase our art, but its usefulness for society and for building global peace, reconciliation. These are larger drives that are happening. And I think we need to tap into those kind of forms and see the connections we can make. I mean, these are not tall talks, but they're actually happening. And I want to tell you this because coming to this forum, the first thing I felt was, usually it would be some famous dancer who has to talk about their experience. And those are the kind of refined cultural personalities that have dominated the art scene, or they are the knowledge vanguards. But today, knowledge for art is very diverse, is very diversified. And unless we tap into those potentials, we are not going to build that sustainable model that we've talked of today. So I'll stop there. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sanjukta ji and Amandeep ji, for coming on this platform and sharing your views and ideas about state patronage or institutional patronage of art.